Salvate omnes and welcome to this week's video tutorial. Today we'll be looking at Lucretia, Paragon of Virtue, based on the writings of the Roman historian Livy. As you can see here, Livy in the first part of his History of Rome describes the downfall of the kings in 509 BC and the establishment of the Republic in the same year. The following incident hastened the overthrow of Rome's final king, Tarquinius Superbus, or as he's known in English, Tarquin the Proud. In terms of the grammar concept, we have cum clauses and the important irregular verb ferro, where, like the word ferry, generally means to carry or to move or to transport, and other associative images with that kind of movement. Legiamos, let us read. Rome regebatur ad tyranno superbo, cuius filius erat Sextus Tarquinius, quidam nocte cum Tarquinius vinum biberet cum amicis caeperunt, quisque uxorum suam laudare. Colatinos dixit suam Lucretiam omnibus ceteris praestatare. Nos conferiamos ad meos aedes videamosque quid mea uxor nunc agat. Tum scietes quantum melior sit mea Lucretia quam aliae. Omnes responderunt disceramus, cum ad illis aedes venissent fidelem Lucretiam non ludentem, sed lanam ducentem invenerunt. Sextus cum videret quam pulchrat pudica Lucretia esset, malo amor captus est, paucis diebus post, cum abesset Calatinus iste revenit, cum cena oblata esset, in hospitale cubiculum ductus est. Media nocte ad dormientum Lucretiam venit. Tace enguit, Sextus Tarquinius sum. Ferrum in mano ferro, cede mihi aut nec necabo. Cum Lucretia necare malet, denique tamon vicit Sextus eos pudiciciam. Tum discessit, sed Lucretia omnia haec ravit, Colatino qui ravit se Sextum negaturum esse. Tum Lucretia se negavit, ne aliis uxoribus videtur malo exemplo esse. Ego me culpa absolvo, sed poene non libero, occidens dixit. As you can see, we have a number of words that are glossed for us that will be helpful. And let us begin with an analysis and parsing, reading and translation, and occasional interpretation of this justly famous text based on Livy's histories. Rome regebatur ad tyranno superbo. So as we said a number of times, let's go ahead and stop right here with our punctuation as a kind of pause to make sense of this clause before we move forward. Rome was being ruled by an arrogant king. So this one is fairly straightforward. We have the batur, which puts it in the imperfect passive. Of course, bam bespat, bamos bates pat tells us it's the past tense. But then we have the tur, arres tur mumini nuntur. As you may recall from an earlier chapter, we put it all together. We have the imperfect passive. Rome was being ruled. A, we've seen this many times, means by. And so the words that follow are in the ablative. And so there we have second declension, ablative, singular is O. Tyranno superbo. So Rome was being ruled by an arrogant king. So we'll go ahead and write that down for us. Superbo could also mean proud king, or could have other translations, but I'm going to go with arrogant in this context. Could be haughty as well. Cuius, whose, there's our possessive adjective, whose son was Sextus Tarquinius. That one's fairly straightforward, just kind of basically knowing the vocab. Whose, filios, son was, and then we have the person's name, Sextus Tarquinius. In fact, they give us some further information about Sextus Tarquinius in our gloss. Whose son was Tarquinius Superbus. Quaedam can be a little bit tricky. I don't think we've had this very often. It means on a certain, or even one. And then notice we have it followed by the word nocte, which means night, third declension, ablative singular. So probably with time expressions, I believe we've said in the past a number of times, probably best just to memorize in Latin. Quaedam nocte, on a certain night. Again, I'm going to go ahead and write this down. Latin so much is slowing it down, taking your time, like in research, got to take your time. On a certain night. Cum, we've seen this as well. This could mean with, but in that case, the word that follows, as you know, would need to be in what case? That's correct, the ablative, but we don't have that in this case, so that in this instance it means when. As always, when you're doing your Latin, I highly recommend Whitaker's Words, so we can give ourselves a little bit more confidence by just confirming. Here we have with, but in that case it would be a preposition followed by the ablative. As noted, we don't have that, so we're going to have to use it as either an adverb or a conjunction in this case. And when is often the most common way to read it in translation and translate it rather. So on a certain night when Tarquinius was drinking wine, on a certain night, I'm just going to put T for Tarquinius because we're going to be using that many times. When Tarquinius was drinking wine. Of course, in English, we have the word to imbibe something. Often in literature, you might read about the characters imbibing a certain drink of sorts, and so you can see that comes right from the Latin. Grammatically, this is interesting because since we have cum, and as you know, cum has a variety of clause types, as we've learned in a previous chapter. So this actually is in the subjunctive. So if we were to look this up in our Whitaker's Words, you're going to see here's our imperfect active subjunctive third person singular. As noted, since we're putting in English, that's in one sense not the biggest deal for us, but if we were writing, and then also the level of interpretation, it is somewhat important, but we're going to put this just in the active, or indicative rather, mood when we're translating it. So on a certain night when Tarquinius was drinking wine, so our vinum, that is straight declension, second declension, accusative singular, that's our direct object. On a certain night when Tarquinius was drinking wine with his friends, so this is nice. So we had cum as a conjunction, when, but here we have cum as a preposition, with. How do we know the difference? Well, amicis is second declension ablative plural, so that tells us that we're dealing with a preposition in this case. So we're going to add that as well. On a certain night when Tarquinius was drinking wine with his friends, Caeperunt, they tell us well, they don't tell us what it means, but they kind of give us a grammar hint. This actually is a word you've had way back in chapter 1, although just not in its past tense form, because we have eront. It means they begin. So I'm not going to do it here, but if we were to look that up, I'll do it one more time, but I assume you're doing this on your end. So here we have the perfect, so we're going to put it in the past tense, so not begin, but past tense is began. Could also say commenced. That would work, just depending on how literary you want to make it. But it is erunt, which tells us it's third person plural. And then the quisque, which is can be a little bit tricky in Latin, kind of like each person. In other words, each one of these friends. So everyone began to praise his wife. So there's the quisque, there's the caeperunt, and then to praise is the laudare, his wife. So just to cover that one more time, everyone began, caeperunt quisque, to praise. That's also a verb you had in chapter 1. Here we have the infinitive to praise, and then here we have the accusative direct object, suam, his, uxorum means wife. So third declension, accusative singular is em, so that makes it the direct object in that sentence. So each person began to praise his wife. Coletinos, now they tell us that Coletinos was a famous noble Roman. Again, this is based on Livy's history, so this actually was an existing person. Coletinos said that his Lucretia, praestare means was distinguished or was stood out, so was distinguished among all the others or excelled all of the others. So I will look this word up for us to give us a little bit of confidence that we're reading it. You can see this can mean a lot of things. Excelled, surpass, superior. The main idea is that Coletinos is saying that his wife is the best of all. And so, but here we also, which makes this perhaps a little bit tricky, is we have the ablative of comparison. And so he's saying that his wife is better than all the other men's wives. And so omnibus ceteris is also in the ablative. If you look on your declension chart, is ibus, is ibus. You can see there's the omnibus ceteris. So we put all together is Coletinos said, we don't have that, but I'm going to say that in the English translation just because I think it smooths out the translation, that his wife, Lucretia, excelled all of the others. And we'll see that what he's saying here is that she excelled them in her virtue. Sam is going to put C, right? Said that, or maybe even surpassed might even be nicer, right? So. Coletinos said, oop, I forgot his Lucretia. Let me add that as well. And then he gives explanation as to why he says this. He says, conferamos, they don't have that there, but it is a form of pharaoh, as you can see, merely as we just have the prefix confer. So what this means is let us go. And nos is we. So he's saying, Coletinos is saying to everybody else who is drinking this wine at this gathering, let us go to my house. I'm going to go ahead and write that first. let us go to my house, and there's the quay, and let us see what my wife is doing now. So just a few more comments on this one. Odd is always followed by the accusative. So first declension, accusative plurals, as. Third declension, accusative plural is es. And we can confirm that. I assume you have this out as well by looking at our declension endings. So there's as, es. And we have this verb in the subjunctive because it is a hortatory suggestion or command. In fact, both of these verbs are in the subjunctive. And let us see quid, what, my wife, agat, also a verb you had in chapter 1, is doing now. Tum means then. Of course, tis means you all, osmos tisnet. Then you all will know how much better my Lucretia is than the others. So let me write this down and then I will explain the Latin in further detail. Tum, then you will know, you all will know. Quanto, like quantity. Here they have by how much. I just wrote how much. Melior is anytime you see IOR, that is the comparative. We have the word ameliorative or amelioration in English. It means to improve or to make better. Here we also have the subjunctive form in the third person singular of the verb is or to be, and then my Lucretia is, and then we have kind of the comparison with the other wives, then the others. This one is fairly straightforward because going back to this kind of basic grammar, Lucretia, and then alia. So we're comparing Lucretia, which is the nominative singular, with the others, which is the nominative plural. So Lucretia aliae. So that's important to note. Everyone responded, or they all responded. Or they all said would work as well. They all responded, let us go. Desqueríamos, so let us go. Let us go and see if what you say is true. Cum again, we've had cum a couple times. This can be tricky in learning Latin, so they're giving us opportunity to, in fact, there it is again. And we said many times, if the word that follows is in the ablative, it means with. Well, here we have a preposition. So a preposition can't be a case. And so that already tells us the answer. It's not with, but when. So when they had arrived to that house, namely Colatinos' house, when they had arrived to that house, our main verb is all the way at the end of the sentence, which, as you know, is common in Latin. They found, like an invention, we've had this word many times, they found the faithful Lucretia not playing, but spinning, literally leading. In fact, they tell us to spin wool. So spinning wool like Penelope in Homer's The Odyssey while Odysseus is away. So when they had arrived to that house, they found in Venerunt the faithful Lucretia, the Fidelem Lucretiam, not playing, but spinning wool. Again, a reference, no doubt, to Homer's The Odyssey and Penelope, who is spinning wool to ward off her suitors who are pursuing her for their own self-interest, while they believe, but Penelope doesn't, that Odysseus has been lost at sea after the Trojan War. Sextus, when he saw how beautiful and chaste, which is, of course is related to the point of her virtues, Sextus, when he saw how beautiful and chaste Lucretia was captured by a bad love. And of course, here is sort of the twist, is that Lucretia is not his wife, but Colatinos's, but the king, and this is why he turns out to be the last king, basically is taken with her, but in a bad way. And we'll see the consequences of that in a second. So let's go ahead and write this out. I'm going to write for this last part, was taken for her in an evil way, which is not the best translation, but I think it gives a better sense of the meaning of the original Latin and why he turns out to be the last king. So it helps us with that context. So captus est, he was captured with a bad love. And again, we explained earlier, well, why is it bad? Well, she is not his wife, and it's bad also because of what he does in this fit of blind passion. Paucis deibus post, by a few days, but probably in this case, a few days later. We've said several times, probably best to memorize time expressions. But post, of course, means after, like post-game press conference, but in this case, it's a post-preposition word order, so a few days later. When Colatinos was away, literally was absent. When Colatinos was away, he referring to Sextus, he returned. So this one requires us that we have a little sense of the context here. So a few days later, when Colatinos was away, he returned, revenit, iste referring back to Sextus here. So he returned to Colatinos' and Lucretia's house. When, okay, because we don't have the ablative here, because we don't have a macron there, so that's going to be when. So cana means food. Oblata, which I don't think we've had before, and I don't think it's glossed for us. No. So we're going to look this up just to give us a little bit of confidence here. It is a participle. So when, or in this case, maybe even after food had been offered. So after food had been offered, he was led into a guest room, is how that works right there. So he was, since he's the king and he's a guest, he's given some hospitality, and he's offered some cana or some food, and then afterwards he's shown his quarters or his room. So I'll write this out and I'll make a few more comments on this sentence perhaps. When Constance was away, he returned. After is how I'm going to read cum in this case. Or cana can also mean dinner, after dinner, because kibos would be probably the better choice for food. After dinner was served. So after dinner was served, he, again referring to Sextus, literally was led, and I'm going to translate this as a guest room. You can see they don't give us the exact translation, but they give us kind of the meaning. Hospitales, we get the word hospitality, so a guest bedroom. In fact, bedroom might even be better here, so a guest bedroom to be even more precise in English as well. Medianotte, in the middle of the night, he went to the sleeping Lucretia. So we're already getting a sense of the problematic malo, amore, or the problematic aspect of this kind of desire. So in the middle of the night, so only the context will tell us, but we're referring, we know that Lucretia is not the subject because it's AM, and as you know by now, that's first declension accusative singular, so that's the direct object. So if it's the direct object, it can't be the nominative subject. So we're referring to Tarquinius Superbus here, or Sextus. So he went to Lucretia's room, and he says, quiet, take, he says. So I'm going to write that down since it's a complete sentence. Quiet, or be quiet. I am Sextus Tarquinius. I carry, there's our verb that we noted earlier, means generally to carry or to move or to bring. I am carrying a ferrum, which means a small sword or dagger. So we can look this one up. It's a common word in Latin. It's good to know. So a sword or a small knife. So he's carrying a sword or a knife. I am carrying a sword or a small dagger, or a dagger rather, in my hand, in mano. I'm going to say dagger because gladios, I think, when we think of the Roman legions, I don't think he's carrying that large of a sword, but a knife or a ferrum. Of course, in chemistry, Fe is the abbreviation for iron, so that's pretty cool. I'm carrying a dagger in my hand, in mano. Sede mehi, that is in the imperative. Literally, fall to me, or do what I tell you. Give yourself to me is kind of like the literal translation. Give yourself to me, or I will kill you. Looking at this Latin right here, so sede is in the imperative, so literally, like, give yourself to me, fall to me, or out, I will, bo be 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 boo, and then just neko means to kill, and then you. Since, so here's cum also can mean, cum as you know can mean a lot of different things, and this is one of the main grammar topics in this chapter, of course, so let's just review this yet again. But it's very important to kind of decide exactly how it's being used and then choose an appropriate reading and translation. I'm going to go with since on this one, just given the context. Since Lucretia preferred, so malo is to prefer or to wish. They give us that word right over here. Since Lucretia preferred to be killed, then to allow Sextus to compromise her virtue, right? So let me go ahead and write that down. So since Lucretia preferred to be killed, or even in this case, you might even say, I'm going to change the translations, not change the translation, but kind of interpret it more idiomatic English. Lucretia preferred to be killed rather than to have her virtue compromised. So that's kind of a free translation, which we can do as long as we understand the original Latin. So since Lucretia preferred, necadere means to be killed, so it's just another form of neko. Denique, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Nevertheless, Sextus, literally what it means is then nevertheless conquered Sextus her virtue, which doesn't make a lot of sense literally, so we got to be a little bit creative with our translation here. But that's the sense of it, is that rather than allow Sextus to compromise her virtue, which is the whole point of this passage in one sense, in terms of its main theme, she would rather be killed by Sextus than to have him compromise her virtue. Let's see here. But then it happened, if you will, and then he left tum dicessit. So then he left, but we can read between the lines that because we already read earlier that we're talking about evil or malo amore, which was a common theme in ancient literature, that desires can go in either direction. They can be for good, but also for evil. It just depends on how we use them, and how we understand how we're using them as well. So then he left, but Lucretia told all these things, literally everything, to her husband Colatino. So you tell something to someone. So notice Colatino is in the second declension dative singular, because that's what the dative generally means, to or for whom something is done. So, but Lucretia told everything, omnia haec, to Colatinos. Who swore that he would kill Sextus. Juravit, of course, remember Latin didn't have a J, but this is where we get the word jury, or judicial. So here it's referring to qui, is who, referring back to Colatinos as our antecedent. So, who swore that necatorum is the future tense? So we have we've had a variety of forms of this verb neco, which means to kill. But if you see urum, that tells us it's future. Remember urum, ura, urus. And then since sextus is in the accusative, because we have which is just basic Latin grammar for you at this point, that tells us that he's going to kill him, or sextum, which makes it the accusative direct object. Then Lucretia killed herself. So kind of given the fact that this is just a brief adapted passage from the larger original, kind of jumps a little bit in the narrative perhaps. So then Lucretia killed herself. I'm going to write that down. Lest, that's that nay, which can be tricky, because especially in American English, but I believe that's the best way to translate the nay, which is common in Latin, followed by the subjunctive. Lest she be seen in terms of radiator, or be regarded as in terms of her lack of virtue or lack of chastity, lest she be seen by the, like in the eyes, by the other wives or women, by the other wives, to be literally a bad example. In this case, it means that she would no longer be the paragon or example of virtue. So let me explain that in a little more detail. Then Lucretia killed herself out of shame. Livy tells us, lest she be seen, videatur, that's third person passive singular, by the other wives. So there is our ablative again. So this can be tricky, but hopefully you're getting more confidence in the ablative. But there it is, our alius uxoribus, both in the ablative plural. And then to be esse, and then to be what, literally here they give us some hint as to this, right? She would no longer be seen as a paragon of virtue. And she says, I am absolving myself from blame, but I will never free myself from literally the punishment of having her virtue compromised. So I will never free myself from this shame. So let me write this down, and then I'll explain that poene, how that might be interpreted, or rather translated differently as well. So by killing herself, she says, I am absolving or freeing from blame or guilt, but I will not, in the sense I'm not able to. Let's look this word up here, because poena, it's where we get the word punishment. So penalty, punishment. I think in this case it means the penalty of being punished by her conscience for what had happened to her by Sextus. So I'm going to keep punishment, although that obviously sounds a little bit stilted in English. Basically, she's saying that I will never free myself. I will never be able to live with myself because of what has happened. So Romans didn't really have a sense of conscience. It's more of a Christian thought. But when we think of virtue or vice, I think later in the tradition and Christian thought, we definitely often read about conscience. She said, dying. So dixit, past tense, dico, dicere, dixi, dictum. And then here's our present participle, dying. All right, as always, let me know if you have any questions about this famous passage from Livy's Histories.